Okay, I think it's good and we can get going. Okay, let me pull this up. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Rack, and I'm a graduate student here at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture, and I'm one of your moderators tonight alongside Danny Castellane. I would like to thank you all for joining for the sixth and final talk of this year's Waterloo Arriscraft speaker series titled What is Solidarity? Before we begin this event, one of our team members, Maddie, is going to walk through a few technical and accessibility items, so I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, yeah. Please note that this event will be recorded and live streamed. In the event that we reach a capacity of 350 people on Teams, the event will be available to watch at the live stream link that will be shared in the chat. Automatic closed captioning is available for this event and all future events in this series. Note that it must be enabled individually. So if you'd like to turn on this feature now, click on the three ellipses in the top right-hand corner and click on Turn on Live Captions. The words should appear at the bottom of your screen. Transcripts can also be provided by request after the event. Should you have any accessibility concerns during the event, please contact Adrian Blackwell. His contact information will also be posted in the chat. We ask that all participants stay muted throughout the event, and that at the end there will be a Q&A where we will all take questions from the audience. At that time, you can raise your hand, ask a question, or you can type your question in the chat. If we are at or near capacity, one of our moderators will also be moderating the chat in the live stream and relaying those questions here. We ask that participants keep their videos off until the Q&A portion of the event so that our speakers' videos can stay pinned invisible. I believe that sums up all of our technical and accessibility concerns, so let's go get this started.
All right, thanks, Maddie. And thank you again, everyone, for tuning in today. This year's speaker series has been curated by faculty members Adrian Blackwell and Jane Hutton, as well as 4 graduate students, Vic Mantha Blythe, Mayuri Paranthahan, Jade Manbode, and myself. Our talk today is centered around the main question of the speaker series, what is solidarity? Where we ask how we as architects participate in collective, long-term social movements for change and advocate within and beyond our professional obligations. So seeing as our discussion today will be focused on food, it seems only appropriate to begin by discussing land, and specifically by acknowledging the land our school occupies. While we're calling in from all over today, I'm currently living in and speaking to you from Cambridge, Ontario, just down the street from the School of Architecture. The land that I live and work on is a part of the Haldimand Tract, promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, which includes 10 kilometers on either side of the Grand. These are the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. Today, we are discussing the topic of food sovereignty. I think it's important to acknowledge and reflect on the relationship between our current food crisis and colonial agricultural practices. Extractive food systems have served not only as powerful tools of colonial dispossession, but have also been immensely destructive to the land, and by extension, destructive to Indigenous ways of life. The ongoing colonial nature of food systems is clearly reflected in the disproportionately high rates of food insecurity amongst Indigenous communities across Canada. With this in mind, any meaningful work to restore the social, ecological, and cultural damage these systems have created must look to the work of Indigenous leaders and happen in solidarity with local land-back movements. And it is our hope that our discussion tonight serves as a jumping-off point for the further engagement with both food sovereignty movements and, by extension, land-back movements on the Haldimand Tract and beyond. So now to begin our discussion tonight, I'll introduce our moderator, Danny. Danny is a trans Two-Spirit person of Métis, French, and Dutch heritage. Their historical community is that of Region 7 in Georgian Bay within the region of Penetanguishene and La Fontaine. Danny is currently working remotely in Block 2 of the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised the Haudenosaunee Six Nations, as an intern architect for Patrick R. Stewart of the Niska Nation. They hold a bachelor's degree from the University of Guelph, a bachelor of architectural studies from the MacEwan School of Architecture, and a master's degree in architecture from the University of Waterloo School of Architecture. Their master's thesis focused on water access, rituals, and temporary habitation necessary for Indigenous fish harvesting practices within communities surrounding Georgian Bay, through the format of a graphic novel. Now, to begin our discussion tonight, I'll hand things over to Danny.
Thank you, Nicole. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our talk on food sovereignty. Food sovereignty movements center the rights of all people to healthy, culturally appropriate, ecologically sound, and self-determined food systems. The present state of the global food market has entrenched oppressive and unsustainable production methods, which exploit both workers and the earth, creating a global food security crisis, one in which is disproportionately borne by Black and Indigenous communities. The food sovereignty movement, driven by farmers, fishers, Indigenous land protectors, and grassroots organizations, has from the start disrupted these barriers to encourage the revival of cultural and ecological relationships to land. As architects, landscape architects, and urban planners, how can we look to the work of these leaders and contribute to a growing, healthy, and resilient food systems that are equitable for producers, distributors, and consumers alike? Tonight, we are fortunate enough to have three great speakers who are all actively engaged in this work through their activism, research, and art practices. Paul Taylor, the Executive Director of FoodShare Toronto, Sherry Pictou, Assistant Professor of the Schulich School of Law, Dalhousie University, and Vivian Sansour, founder of the Palestine Heirloom Seed Garden. So I'll introduce our first speaker, Paul Taylor. Paul Taylor is the Executive Director of FoodShare Toronto, and a lifelong anti-poverty activist, having worked both in Toronto and in Vancouver. Growing up materially poor, Paul has focused his career not just on helping others, but dismantling the beliefs and systems that lead to poverty and food insecurity, including colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. In 2020, Taylor was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40 and Toronto's Life's 50 most influential Torontonians of the year. Welcome.
Thank you so much for this wonderful invitation to join you this evening for the speaker series. It's a real honor to be here with you. You know, before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on these lands that I proudly call home. But, you know, lately I've been reflecting on land acknowledgements and really thinking about my role in writing relations. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is that many land acknowledgements that I've heard at public events that I've been to end with speaking about the responsibility for settlers to participate in advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And I find myself thinking, what about me? I'm not a settler. My ancestors didn't come here in pursuit of economic opportunity. My ancestors were forcibly brought here during the transatlantic slave trade. They were stolen from their homes, their families, their communities, and brought to Turtle Island against their will. I bring this up not only because it's something that's really important to me, but it's actually the very foundation of the modern industrial food system. You know, the food system that likely provided your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner, it certainly provided many of those things for me. It's a system built on white supremacy, and I simply can't do the work that I'm involved in without recognizing that glaring truth and how white supremacy continues to inform our food system, among many of the other systems that we interact with, that we all interact with. So for me, you know, today and every day, it's also important to acknowledge folks that are on this land that are neither Indigenous to Turtle Island, nor are we settlers. The modern industrial food system really saw to it that my stolen ancestors were made to farm on stolen Indigenous lands, you know, stolen bodies farming on stolen land. That's, you know, thinking about that and making space for really sitting in that knowledge is why I've come to view struggles for Indigenous food sovereignty, Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation as inextricably linked. It's actually why I've made a commitment to show up in support of Indigenous sovereignty. I've stood on rail lines, I've participated in blockades, I've made several trips in solidarity, and to offer material support to the Indigenous land defenders at 1492 Landback Lane, which, as was mentioned, is not very far from where many of you are today. I do this because we need to collectively fight back on the forces that continue to collectively harm us. White supremacy continues to inform everything, including the modern industrial food system. It has even made it so that Black and brown bodies are still the primary source of manual labor on predominantly white-owned farms in this province and across Turtle Island. Manual labor that often, in a lot of ways, goes unnoticed, uncelebrated, and unseen. I work at an organization called FoodShare. And like I said, we can't do the work that we do without recognizing what has caused the issues that we seek to challenge, dismantle, and improve. We do this in a number of ways, but I would say mainly in our ongoing commitment to advocating for better by acknowledging the role that these destructive and oppressive systems continue to play, especially how they impact, who has enough food to eat and who doesn't. These types of inequities, these organizing principles that have been allowed to exist and inflict further violence are as a result of, in some ways, the chronic underinvestment in low-income communities, which we all know, low-income communities are often the communities with higher Indigenous, Black, and POC populations. So what I feel like we've done, instead of tackling the root causes like anti-indigeneity and anti-Black racism, for many years, the most resourced response in this country to these structural inequities has been to dump leftover food or corporate waste on these communities by way of food banks. Food Share is not a food bank. We don't give away anyone's leftovers. Instead of leftover food for leftover people, we work with folks in community to build community-based food infrastructure, community-owned, community-managed food infrastructure. Some of this look like everything from turning, a sprawling grassy hydro corridor into an urban farm in the Flemington Park community in Toronto, to transitioning the school field without any sports teams at the school at Burnhamthorpe Collegiate into a 2-acre urban farm and a weekly produce market, to even supporting over 50 communities across the city of Toronto to develop what we call good food markets. So in essence, those are subsidized produce markets that in a lot of ways actually look a lot like farmers markets, but instead really prioritize access, affordability, and culturally relevant produce instead of a sole focus on local food. In essence, we support access to produce for folks that have had barriers to access foisted upon them time and time again. So it's not enough to talk about nice programs, especially when it comes to charities. Solidarity to me includes solidarity with my lowest paid colleagues. This is something we don't talk about very often in the nonprofit space, and something that I think we need to shed a lot of light on. So at Food Share, we recognize the need to challenge income inequality, not just out in the world, but also within our own organization. It's what led us to introduce, a transparent pay grid that gave a 25% increase to our lowest paid colleagues, coupled with no increase for the senior leadership team. We also went on to introduce, a lowest paid to highest paid pay ratio of 1 to 3.7, which means the highest paid worker at Food Share can make no more than 3.7 times what our lowest paid colleague makes. It's why our essential workers who are growing, packing, and delivering produce were provided with a $4 an hour increase in pay in response to the pandemic. It's been in effect since March of last year and continues to this day. It's why we no longer negotiate salaries as part of the hiring process, because someone doesn't get paid more just because society has been designed for them or because their work is more likely to be seen and valued. Instead, what we've committed to is equal pay for equal work. We even have a non-interest emergency loan of up to $2,000 that we make available to any of our colleagues whenever they need it. Often it's being used to assist with first and last month's rent. Our colleagues decide how much they need, how long it'll take for them to pay that back, and how much they can afford. To me, that is what solidarity looks like to us. Both inside Food Share's walls and outside of our walls. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to collectively push back against those systems that sometimes feel impossible. They feel impossible to challenge or change. We're doing what we can, I feel like, when we can, because we see it as our responsibility, as part of our work to tackle food insecurity and its root causes. I really feel that evoking that kind of fundamental shift that we need is going to be difficult. And that's why we need everyone working to do what we can to change things. So much of what we face is inevitable, despite the forces that try very hard to convince us otherwise. These realities are often a direct result of political priorities that don't reflect the needs of those that struggle the most. I think, if I can leave you with one thing, I think one of our most important responsibilities is to use our power, our influence in whatever spaces that we have to bring about much needed progressive change. I think we all need to keep dreaming in color about a world of possibility, a world that allows everyone to thrive. That's my hope, and I guess that's my challenge for us all, that each and every one of us find ways to, leave our communities, our cities, our countries, and even our world much better than we found it, because it is possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your work and also for starting out our talk in a really good way. I want to introduce our second speaker, Sherry Pictou. Sherry Pictou is a Mi'kmaq woman from Elsakuk, or Water Cuts Through High Rocks, known as Bear River First Nation, Nova Scotia. She's an assistant professor in the faculties of law and management at Dalhousie University, focusing on Indigenous governance. Dr. Pictou is also a former chief for her community and the former co-chair of the World Forums of Fisher People. She is the member of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, Task Force on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. Her research interests include decolonizing treaty relations, social justice for Indigenous women's role in food and lifeways, and Indigenous governance. Thank you very much, Sherry.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much, Paul, for opening that. I think we were on somewhat similar wave lengths today. Yeah, it's such an honor to be here. I'm just really honored to be here and really excited to meet our next guest speaker as well. Because I have a dear friend from Palestine that's also been involved in the seed movement, so this will be really interesting. I'm just wondering now if I can rely on the organizers to share the screen. Someone taken over. No? Did we lose my little PowerPoint there?
Do you know who you sent it to?
No, I didn't send it. Someone just stepped in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if we have it.
I'm just not sure if I can upload that again. Let me see if I can do it. And if it takes too much, we'll just have to live without it. How about that? Okay. Okay. This file already exists, so it's there somewhere. I'm just going to replace it. Let it download here for a second. Sorry about this, folks. We thought we had this all sorted out earlier. It takes a while to... Yeah. It's opening. Technology.
There.
Okay,
yeah,
can
everybody
see that? Oh, fantastic. So first of all, I just want to emphasize I have a long history involved in small-scale fisheries work, and particularly Indigenous fisheries, the treaty right to fishery. But I must apologize. I think that's what people wanted me to speak about tonight. And I'm going to weave a little bit of that fishery work in there, but I'm more interested in talking about some of my current work, which is looking at various types of land dispossessions and water dispossessions, particularly of our ancestral homelands. And as most of you know, I just want to show you my ancestral homelands. Everyone could say that. I'm a Mi'kmaq woman from Mi'kma'ki. And what I'm showing you there is historically our hunting and fishing districts. And they were like, the borders sort of ran like naturally with a river system and so forth. And I'm from down in Gaspuit, which means the end of the flow. And that's roughly where my community is. But as you know, we have a long legacy of colonialism that's ongoing. And there's also a long history that's still continuing, that's ongoing, of imposing patriarchal and colonial structures on Indigenous societies. And as a part of that colonialism, in this next slide, you'll see how those, like particularly if you look at all those little red dots, the yellow dots are my friends, the Wolustiq, the beautiful river, the people of the beautiful river, but all the little red dots, and including over in Newfoundland, those ancestral homelands were quickly reduced to those little red dots. And just to emphasize this point, if you look at the right-hand map, this is a food study, traditional use study that was several years ago, and you just focus in and why you see that big dark dot. That's where my reserve is. But so that's sort of a far cry from those whole ancestral homelands. So I just wanted to show that to you. And so you can see how these hunting and fishing districts have been, reduced over time due to all these colonial policies and so forth. But what I want to talk about is some of these contemporary forms of dispossession, and that's ongoing. And when I'm talking about dispossession, this includes Indigenous food, water systems, and lifeways. And the forms of dispossession I'm talking about is resource extraction, intensive fishing, intensive forestry practices like clear cutting, mega projects here in what's called Nova Scotia now. We have the Alton Gas Project, where basically they want to clear out these big salt caverns. I don't know if you've heard of this, and dump that salt into a really important river system to the Mi'kmaq people, and particularly the people of Suspenagity, and fill those gas caverns, or those salt caverns, with natural gas. And this has been an ongoing struggle. And then across the country, of course, you've seen the controversy about pipelines and mining and fracking and so forth. And just to kind of give you a little minute, a little tiny bird-eyes view that what's happened in my areas, particularly around that first 2000s, 2010, but this is still ongoing as well. But this is where some of my struggle has been. You can see Bear River First Nation is right about there, that big dark dot I had showed you. And our clam beaches, which I was raised on these beaches, were privatized. It's quite complicated to explain, but because of pollution, one company gets to access to those beaches. Then we fought for about 7 years, this big, huge mega quarry in here and a prime fishing area. We eventually won, but however, the company was American and they sued the province of Nova Scotia under NAFTA. And then we're still dealing with these salmon farms, but yet you'll see this right whale area and so forth. And so I just wanted to show that because there's like these type of privatization enclosures all around our community that impacts our food and water systems. And this is just a minute picture, a bird's eye picture of what's going across northern Turtle Island, what we call Canada. And so even in the area of reconciliation, you heard Paul talk about this, and treaty rights and Aboriginal rights, there's still this ongoing dispossession. And in the east coast of northern Turtle Island, as I showed you, we have here peace and friendship treaties that date back from like the early 1700s. And there was no given over land. What they were peace and friendship treaties, pre-Confederation treaties to coexist. And in return, our hunting and fishing districts weren't supposed to be infringed upon. And so we have these Aboriginal treaty rights under the Constitution. We also have the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but there's some debate about how that's currently being implemented. There's a debate if the new bill known as Bill C-15 goes through, that's in fact domesticating the universal nature of the UNDRIP. And basically, it's making sure it comes under Canadian sovereignty. But I want to note that despite all these treaty and Indigenous and Aboriginal rights, it's very important to remember that those come out of the hard struggle, very hard struggle of the Indigenous peoples themselves. It wasn't like one day, we're just going to give Indigenous peoples treaty rights. And what's interesting to pay attention to is this interplay in terms of how the state deals with Indigenous peoples, those relations. What are the gender relations around that and so forth? So, particularly with concepts like reconciliation, recognition and so forth. These are usually conducted within state-sanctioned, state-driven processes. And so subsequently there appears to be only these two choices. It's either this real neoliberal form of development that is actually being imposed on poorer countries. This is being imposed on First Nations communities, Indigenous communities, very neoliberal, very huge, or the other side that, oh, we'll recognize your culture. And I know Glenn Coulthart speaks to this quite, a Dene scholar, quite extensively in his Redskins, White Masks book that was published in 2014. So what you find is rather if it's treaty rights, resource exploitation, extraction issues, these all have to do with food. But we don't think of that, and we've been trained to think about food systems and food sovereignty a certain way that it's difficult to wrap our mind around that. And we don't think about the dispossession from sources of food. This could be plants, animals. Also, there are agricultural indigenous societies and these different forms of food. And so what I wanted to just point out, so what we find ourselves into this really strange dilemma, because the neoliberal model seems to be the only model that the state will allow Indigenous people to exercise their Aboriginal and treaty rights, is that we often find ourselves in situations where our leadership have inadvertently or directly or indirectly have really participated mobilizing some of these projects forward because it's the only choice. Then what happens, and it's mostly Indigenous women and two-spirited or 2S-LGBTQI people, gender diverse people, that find themselves in the situation that they're trying to defend sources of land and water, to find out that, oh, our leadership in one way or another has somehow already been involved or consulted with, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not. So what I'm trying to get at here is the gender discrimination, and that we must ask ourselves why. Why is it that this neoliberal option is the only option? Why is that? And for women and gender diverse persons, they find themselves criminalized, let alone the violence perpetrated against them. This is criminalized. So that's a clear picture that sign on to this pipeline, you're going to be okay. You try to defend your homelands from this pipeline, we're going to arrest you. So that is the state. That's the state of affairs for Indigenous peoples. So I just want to switch here. So now I'll talk a little bit about the fishery, and I'm going to try to wrap up here because I know, we're out of time, almost out of time here. But the fishery is very complex, has a long history. And what I'm showing you here is, a form of what I like to call treaty research, a form of solidarity with my friend and colleague Martha Stegman. And if you ever want to look these up, they're free on YouTube. And Defense of Our Treaty speaks about the fisheries. And this was another project, We Story the Land, which we reclaimed some river systems. And it's, this system, this vicious circle that we seem to be caught in terms of trying to exercise Aboriginal and treaty rights that we fought so hard in the courts and so forth, preempts any alternative visions and any alternative visions of trying to enact livelihood and food systems. And so even in cities, I want to bring your attention to this report, the Red Women Rising report. Even in cities, this great report that was released just a few months before the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Final Inquiry report, speaks to the type of dispossession in urban areas, city areas. And this is a report about the survivors in Vancouver's downtown east side, and examines dispossession in a city context and how this contributes to food, health issues, and so forth. And I don't know how to get to my, oh, there we go. And I spoke not too long ago, I think it was, well, it's been over a year ago, I think it was in the fall of 2019, this Feminist City, this field guide Leslie Kern had written about. And what I was trying to emphasize, that even in cities, we don't think about the Indigenous presence there. And I really want to raise this because I ran across, this is something that's triggered my thinking about, Paul, about land acknowledgements, this Indigenous author, Nicole Pennock, and she writes in this book called Indigenous Research. She talks about how we forget about the people that are still existent in the cities, and how in land acknowledgements sometimes we're removed from those cities. And so, and I just want to end with this. Like she said, these reconciliation era acknowledgements, some kind of effort to capture the indigeneity of this space in a pronouncement bound by the strict confines of the past tense, though they are being tediously worked over by committees of expert consultants. The story they tell still seems to place Indigenous people outside of this time, outside of this space. When people talk about connecting to the land, they often point outside of the city. The Indigenous lives, culture, stories live somewhere separate from here. These land acknowledgements do little to correct this, as they fail to talk about land but political dealings. As Indigenous peoples, our connection to land is somewhat dialectic. The trickery that removes the land, the landless, from the city's story appears to take Indigenous peoples and our stories with it. So in terms of solidarity, examine the complexities of these struggles on the ground and ask who benefits. While you exist in one group, are you marginalized in others? Paul spoke to this. On a broader scale initiative like the blue-green economies, ask who's benefiting. I have a friend, he says, always ask who benefits from those economies. And the spaces they even inhabit or take up, are these another form of dispossession? And I'll just leave you with this one last reference, The Land We Are, which is a beautiful book about critique and reconciliation and its settlers, migrants, and Indigenous people. And this was done in Vancouver, and I'll leave you with that. So I'm sorry if I went over my time, but thank you very much.
So many good resources. Thank you, Sherry, for your presentation and offering us a glimpse into the realities and the complexity concerning Indigenous harvesting and the struggles that accompany them. So thank you. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I don't know if Vivian is here. Vivian?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Perfect. Vivian Sansour is an artist, storyteller, researcher, and conservationist. She uses image, sketch, film, soil, seeds, and plants to enliven old cultural tales in contemporary presentations and to advocate for seed conservation and the protection of agrobiodiversity as a cultural political act. Vivian founded the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library as part of this work with local farmers and has been showcased internationally, including at the Chicago Architecture Biennale, the V&A Museum in London, Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven, and the Venice Art Biennale. A culinary historian and enthusiastic cook, Vivian works to bring threatened varieties back to the dinner table, to become a part of our living culture rather than a relic of the past. This work has led to her collaboration with award-winning chefs, including Anthony Bourdain, Sami Tamimi. Born in Jerusalem, Vivian lives in both Bethlehem, Palestine, and Los Angeles, USA. Thank you for joining us, Vivian.
Thank you. Am I on? I've never used this before.
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, okay. Great. I can't see anybody. I just have to see myself. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know. This is a challenging platform for me a bit. But I actually, first of all, thank you so much for including me in your program, especially with two amazing folks who are doing really inspiring work. So I just want to thank Paul and Sherry for their wonderful presentations. Particularly because it's a lot of things that I'm always thinking about also in my work. And it's nice to especially, like, for example, in Sherry's conversation about, like, well, how come the neoliberal model is the only model? Like, how can we design something different? Or with what Paul presented about the discomfort around what do we do with ourselves as people who didn't necessarily like in the case of African Americans who did not choose to come here. They were stolen and brought forcefully, and in fact experienced the worst crime of all, disconnecting people from even being able to look for their heritage in a way, like, for example, as refugees, for example, in Palestine, we're able to at least know which village we come from. So there are so many complexities that were created by this violent empire, if you will, and this violent human tendency to completely disregard other humans. So I'm not sure, how to start this, but I want to say that I am struggling with this question a lot myself, as I am speaking with you here from California, which is, I'm in Chumash land. And I just arrived here actually not long ago in, which is the Ojai Valley. And everybody I asked, because I've been trying to make connection, everybody I asked about, well, can I, where can I meet some folks? Because I didn't want to just be here. And everybody talks about the people of this land as if they don't exist anymore. And so, which is in itself a problem. Like, all of them are, people who claim to be so progressive, and they will sit and they will claim that they are on Chumash land. But they talk about the Chumash people as if there's some kind of relic of the past, something in some kind of fairy tale. And I identify a lot with that, because as a Palestinian, I have been always told even that I don't exist. So when I left Palestine, because this very state, this very country that I'm in right now, and its policies destroyed my country, with now even more recently severe neoliberal policies that are introduced as development and are destroying our farmers and destroying our relationship to our land. And there are so many parallels, obviously. So when I was first here as an immigrant, when people would ask me where I'm from, I would say Palestine, and they would say, "Oh, well, Palestine doesn't exist. What do you mean?" And for me, that obviously stayed with me for forever, for a long time, because I couldn't understand how someone can tell me that I don't exist. Like, not only is it violent, but I was also really young to know how to respond, but also how can it created such a dissonance for me. Like, what do you mean? What kind of question is that? Because could my grandmother be a figment of my imagination? Are these people who know every olive tree and what kind it is, and every pomegranate? Are these people who are a figment of my imagination? Or is the fact that we live by seasons also something that we just sort of made up today or yesterday? And so I start to think a lot about our relationship to land, and how our plants can be a great great storytellers of what it means for us to be people of the land. And so I think a lot about this question of, the world we've kind of all have become part of, and the dominant world, and how maybe a way to push against it is to actually create for ourselves a new design, a design that includes a relationship to land that is not so violent, a relationship to each other that is not so violent. And so for me, I found a lot of solace in seeds, actually. And the more and more I looked for seeds that people also told me didn't exist, including, my story sort of started with my time when I returned to Palestine 10 years ago, and I would speak to farmers, and they would always refer to this gigantic watermelon that they call jaddui. But every time I asked them, well, where is it? How can I taste it? They would say, oh, well, it doesn't exist. You're looking for the dinosaur. And I'm talking about a watermelon that actually lives without irrigation. It's a watermelon that is a variety that has been developed over literally thousands of years, because we still call it till this day Ba'al watermelon. And Ba'al in Arabic refers to the Canaanite deity of fertility. And so when you're talking about something that until today we use, and it has a name from literally thousands of years ago, it kind of really connects you to understand, like, wow, my ancestors gave me something quite precious, because we have these seed varieties that grow with literally zero irrigation. So seeds for me have been a wonderful platform to learn more about who we are, learn more about ourselves, and be able to also understand that we come from an amazing line of artists and scientists, aka farmers and grandparents and grandmothers and grandfathers, who actually gave us something alive and passed it down for so many generations. But today, sadly, in our world, and in Palestine, for example, these seeds are being treated as basically trash. We have all these neoliberal models that come and they say, oh, you don't need these primitive seeds. I mean, they literally call them primitive. They call them primitive ways of growing food. Although those ways are the ways that we have been able to maintain a harmonious relationship with the land. To us, the land isn't an object. It's actually it's a being. It's something we interact with as part of us, not something separate from us. In fact, even the word environment is quite new in Palestinian vocabulary. And it came after the Oslo Agreement, where we were showered with all these development projects that have actually served as a tool by empire, basically, to sever us from a land source. So I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but I just want to speak about two examples of that, and to say that, when actually Cher was speaking, it was really powerful, because there was a moment when she was speaking about the river and the people of the beautiful river, which I loved so much. I thought a lot about how we also have names for our different communities. We have names for our trees. We have names for our rivers, but also how, for example, in Palestine, there are all these projects in Jordan and in Israel that are called, projects to rehabilitate the Jordan River. And the Jordan River is basically completely dry at this point, because Israel has built a dam in the north, and they redirected all its water to irrigate massive agribusiness fields. But if you speak to any of the farmers in the south in Palestine, who actually became refugees. They were kicked off of their land, and now in the little land they have left, they were producing for us. They were the breadbasket in the Jordan Valley for Palestine. But today, their farms that were biodiverse are completely dried out. In fact, they are deserts. But right next to them, you see these massive settlement agribusiness projects that are completely green, but they are monocrops, where Palestinian farmers have been transformed from productive, imaginative, autonomous entities to now people who work as day laborers for agribusiness companies on their land. So I know farmers personally who now their lands were completely dried out because they cut off their water source. The water that is underneath their feet, they are considered illegal if they even try to take any of it. And pipes have been built underneath their village. So they're literally dying of thirst. I mean, the community is disappearing because of lack of water. And now they have to buy water from Israel. Not to mention the fact that we live in a segregated system. So certain roads we cannot be on, so certain lands we cannot be on, which is one of the challenges we also have with our foraging traditions. So we typically foraged in our mountain, in our hills. Now it's really dangerous. You could literally be killed if you're wandering to forage for whatever mallow or whatever we always eat. So actually, our food system, very similar to what happened here also, how the prairies were completely transformed through these, also Sherry talked about Chicago, for example. I was thinking, I did the show in Chicago at the Architecture Biennial, and what was really incredible for me, was just to learn how Chicago itself was a place where it was also a land that people loved and had a relationship with. It was a food source. And now it's these, buildings that actually don't acknowledge and don't include the very same people that they've murdered, basically. So it's so hard not seeing anyone. I feel like I'm speaking to myself. But I wanted to say that I think what I was saying about the Jordan River is that there are all these talks about, how we need to rehabilitate the Jordan River. And they actually spend literally millions of dollars in Jordan River rehabilitation. But if you speak to any farmer in the south of the Jordan Valley, they will tell you, just give me $200, I'll hire a bulldozer and bulldoze the dam they built to basically cut us off they cut off the river running through a river that ran through for all these years. So anyway, working with seeds for me and working with farmers has been a way to assert our relationship to the land, so that we actually also dispel this lie that we are worth nothing. I think many of us, people, indigenous people of color, we have been told that we are shit basically all our lives. We're shit because we're women. We're shit because our skin is too dark. We're shit. All of these lies that actually seep into our brains and our bodies. And so the work I feel is how to work with young people in particular and on ourselves to engage in a journey where we literally extract the beauty that we already have and actually show it to each other. I talk a lot with young people about how we are a center of diversity for wheat, for example. And when they learn that their grandparents were the reason the world eats cookies and bread, they sit different and they talk different. So in this conversation, which is lovely to engage with you guys today, I really hope that we can be also artists in the sense of imagining a new design, a better design for our future, a design that actually can make sense of these complexities, but also take our wound and kind of turn it into something that can be more tender. Maybe we can't change everything, but maybe we can just expand a little bit those spaces of tenderness amongst ourselves. And for me, I guess seeds have been quite an amazing vessel to assert presence, to assert story also, and to learn more about who we are. I think we're often also not just severed from our lands, but we're severed from our ability to know who we are through also education. You know, traditional education doesn't actually lend itself to really honoring indigenous knowledge, for example. So when it comes to solidarity, I'll just say I feel quite a lack in the way institutions actually exercise solidarity rather in practice as a verb, rather than just, you know, acknowledging, oh, we are here on this land, or we include more people, but how are we actually in practice changing the way we teach, changing the way we speak, and truly changing our practices. And I know I probably talk too much, so I'm going to just stop.
Thank you very much, Vivian, for your presentation and shedding light on the importance of that connection to land and water and preserving it for future generations. Thank you. So I guess this is the question period of the talk here. So I will go ahead and ask our speakers the first line of questioning. So in your opinion, what are some of the key building blocks required to reestablish a closer, more symbiotic relationship with the land and greater equitable access to land and whole foods for the communities that you've worked with? To that effect, what are some of the bigger challenges and possible solutions to achieving those goals? I don't know who wants to start. I know it's a big question. Is there like a hand thing? Oh, yes, there's a hand motion that you can do. So if you want to talk, you can just start or... Oh.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yes. What are some of the key building blocks required to reestablish a closer, more symbiotic relationship with the land and also a greater equitable access to land and whole foods for the communities that you've worked with?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question. I mean, it's a great question, actually. And I think that's why these conversations are important. I'm having a really hard time with this platform as electronic, but how do we actually sit together and actually, instead of us kind of, I think in each community, there's a different way, you know, because what may work here, for example, in California, may not work for folks. I think it's very important for us to listen and to also humble ourselves to not think we know exactly what needs to happen, and to also kind of involve everybody in the design, because I think a lot of times, I'm speaking obviously from my experience as a person in Palestine, where we constantly have institutions and government entities that want to, or European organizations that want to just tell us how to do it. So I think for me, the way we go forward with it is to actually, again, like, know ourselves more, and to then dare to imagine things that haven't existed before, and to actually be committed to creating that. And it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes, and it's going to be messy, but I mean, we have to, you know, I was thinking earlier when this conversation started, like, oh, how do I feel about, all these conversations we're always engaged in, but like, what are we doing? And I realized, maybe that is what we're doing. We're trying to figure it out now. And in a tangible way, I think we have to also treat land not as a commodity anymore, and really be more respectful to the spiritual meaning, and the fact that for us land is something that feeds us, and is a relationship. It's not a commodity.
Sherry?
Yes, it's a very complex question, and something I've been exploring myself, particularly in law, like eco-justice versus social justice and so forth. But I really wanted to draw your attention. I was really honored to participate in I was just really an observer, a presentation that was done by Robin Wall Kilmer. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. No, that's another person I'm thinking about. But no, it's the same person. Okay, I got two people mixed up because there's another one in the United States. And she really speaks to this and how to, really change our thinking. It's very difficult to change our thinking. I know Vivian was talking about art, and I wish I could remember that other artist's name. And anyways, it's very interesting how they approach this, because they approach it through art. They approach it through different forms of really how to listen to the land, to the water, and then really establish a relationship there. And the only personal thing that I can share is, Bear River is, and I meant to talk a little bit about this, but didn't have enough time. Bear River is a very, very rural area. And I was kind of raised on the land. And, even with all the enclosures and so forth, somehow we managed to some degree, keep that up. And when I started out trying to find out what everyday people in my community thought about treaty rights, it starts out with fishing, because we won this big fishing, this treaty right to fishing in 1999. And I was so amazed to live in a community and think your community. And it taught, the whole experience taught me a lot, because my own people told me, they said, Sherry, you're not going to understand treaty unless you come moose hunting. So I went moose hunting, and I don't have time to get into it here, but it profoundly changed my life. And just as Vivian was talking about, how do we create these spaces to create? How do we create these spaces to have these discussions? Just like we're having tonight, and you're to be commended. The organizers are to be commended for this, because what that whole experience told me was that that somebody's controlling the narrative, and there's no space. There's no space to discuss something different, or discuss how we view things, to discuss, and it was a phenomenal experience. There's no space in official relationships with the government, rather it's negotiating for Aboriginal. There's no space for Indigenous women and to us LGBTQIA people. There's no space. And that's what my work is now. How do we open up those space to have those discussions, to reestablish those relationships to the land? And it has to be reciprocal. We have to change our mind about it. We've been taught that we dominate nature for commodity. We taught to manipulate that. What a paradigm shift if we were to think, well, why don't we listen to the land? And tell you the truth, I think the land and the oceans are speaking back right now through climate change. Anyways, that's just my little 2 cents worth. It's a complex question. I don't know if I shed any enlightenment on that, but
No, that's great. Actually, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to take a question from the audience. I see Niara has a question. She said that I've heard in the past that it is not possible to feed the entire world if we move back to our traditional ways of feeding ourselves. That doesn't sit right with me. Can anyone speak to that?
I guess I'm gonna try and maybe speak to that one quickly, and others might be able to add more than I. But I also want to go back to that last question because something has been really that's stuck with me. But and also I want to say thank you to the organizers of tonight's event. I find myself just listening in awe and feeling really inspired and being in such a important and special space tonight. So I'm loving everything I'm hearing from Sherry and Vivian. So thank you for bringing me along. Um, I also like that we've been. Oh, sorry. The first thing I'll say is that I think we already produce more than enough food to feed all of the people that inhabit this land. I think we've hit the nail on the head about the modern industrialized food system, the commodification of food, the proliferation of neoliberalism that actually works to ensure that some people get it and some people don't. In Canada, there are 5.5 billion people that are food insecure, and there are also 45 billionaires. So to me, both are failings of public policy. Neither of those things should exist, especially when we have more than enough food, more than enough money, and all of those things to go around. So it also reminds me, especially when I'm thinking about the previous question, I think we need our political leaders have let us down in really profound ways. And I think we've become accustomed to hearing them, make lovely speeches with big promises. And I, like many people, have been one of those folks that's felt like, oh, I actually believe what they're saying. I think they're going to do something about this issue that matters so much to me, I grew up in poverty, and I think about the people that are still forced to navigate the violence that is growing up in living in poverty in this country. So I think one of the things we need to do is, or what I think what we need is we need our political leaders to part with, this whole head in the sand, inaction, or in incrementalism, and to actually push for the types of solutions that are in line with the scale of some of the problems that we face. I'd love for us to be having big conversations in political spaces about calls for things like a Green New Deal and a just transition, that seizes an opportunity to kind of bring together opportunities to advance Indigenous sovereignty, climate justice, while also advancing things like housing justice, gender justice, racial justice, economic justice. These are things that we've been told aren't possible, but I think they are. It's just we've got the wrong people sometimes working for us. And I just want to, for a minute, touch on the question around foods. I think that greater access to foods is a really important question. To whole foods is an important question, and I think one thing that I like to do is I like to begin those conversations centering it on the fact that in countries like Canada, we all have a right to food. Our federal government introduced the right to food in 1966 and then ratified it in 1976. And it means that they have a responsibility. They're the duty bearer, and we're the rights holders. But while our government has made food a right, they've done little to protect it from the whims of the market. Who, as was mentioned earlier, food is a commodity, just like diamonds or a sports car. We can only have them if we can afford them. The problem, while some people might disagree, but we don't need diamonds or sports cars to survive. So I think one of the things we really need to do is if we have these human rights frameworks, like the right to food, we need to ensure that they have teeth and that they're enshrined in things like our domestic legislation so that, when the provinces, for example, are thinking about welfare rates or thinking about minimum wage amounts, that we're looping back to see what impact these domestic policies have on our right to food. Because ultimately the issue of food insecurity is predominantly an issue of income. We've found ways to throw food or food-like substances at it through food banking in this country, but I think we and lost the opportunity to push back and have really big conversations about. We live in one of the richest countries in the world. Why is it that people don't have all the food that they need to eat? It's violent and it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Can I just add something here? Is that appropriate right now, or?
Absolutely.
Thank you. No, I mean, first of all, I agree with you. We don't need vitamins and sports car at all. I wish we really understood that, but that is a symptom, or actually a way that we've become so sick and so separated from land. You know, the conversation today is about land, and recently, you know, I had to buy a car, and I was really, you know, struggling because I just want a car to like function, right? But then I go to buy a car, and the conversation with the car dealer was just so, I mean, it was violent in the way he was talking. He really didn't see me as a human being. And I ended up leaving actually because and he kept saying, but I can give you a better deal. And I said, you don't understand. It's not about the deal. I really feel like you're not respecting me as a human being. Like, even if you give me the car for free now, I don't want it. But this is, you took me to cars, but what I really wanted to say is, we've been so disconnected from our soil that we're really disconnected literally from our soul. And this is not just a cheesy, you know, play on word. It is literal. Like I've done work in Jamaica, for example, a place that I love so much. And I mean, if anybody listening has been to Jamaica, you understand it's like there's nothing you can throw in Jamaica that doesn't grow. It's the most fertile lands I've ever seen. And yet the island like ships in food from everywhere. It just makes no sense. But even worse than that, the colonial lie that, you know, how we are and what we are is not worth anything, and we should look up to the West to be like the West, is so deep-seated that, in fact, you know, in the Caribbean now, you can find signs where people are literally selling their soil. You know, topsoil for sale is a common sign. I mean, what does it mean when you're literally selling your soil and some company from China comes, hauls the soil in a ship and goes away? So it's because soil is no longer being respected and appreciated as a resource that actually very difficult to reproduce, right? And so part of these lies is the lie that we can't feed the world, that, you know, that these companies have been feeding us. Well, sure, you can produce a whole lot of corn if you are now producing corn massively like that. But actually, that's not what feeds the world. We actually know that the people who feed the world are small-scale farmers, are biodiverse farms, and in fact, if anything, the green revolution has led the world to, I would say, nutritional starvation. I mean, we don't eat well. In fact, we are very sick. We're sicker than we've ever been. So is it true that they feed the world? Because from where I'm standing, they don't at all. So I think of the many, many lies that we're fed all the time, literally. I mean, what they are feeding us is bullshit, basically, if I may say that. And so I just want to say, finally, that the West has also played such a violent role in not just feeding this lie, but also making us believe it. Like we like now in Palestine, for example, it's become prestigious to eat at KFC. So you have KFC closing shops here because there's the West is having a renaissance about food and about how it's important to have agroecology, and they come to lecture us and they want to tell us how to do it with total disrespect to who we are. And they literally dump their trashy food on us. Like, I'm talking in Palestine, like KFCs are opening up like nobody's business, like they're everywhere. Versus here, what you see popping up in America, for example, are more like fancy organic stores. Okay, but who's paying the price for that? So are they really feeding us, or are they poisoning us? I think that should be the real question here.
I think it's really refreshing to hear all of our speakers, agree with each other that there's a system that's failing us, and also that there's this increasing gap in inequality and also access to whole foods due to various different things. I have a question from the audience that I will pitch to you, unless somebody wanted to build on what Vivian was saying. Sherry, I see you nodding a lot.
Yeah, I see that other question too about the relationship between ecocide and land grabbing. And all of this is so relevant. And yes, I agree with everything that Vivian just said. It's just because I know for fighting for Indigenous small-scale fishing rights, and if at the international level, and you see how states really react and how they engage with one another, and it's such a neoliberal paradigm that you just have to go to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the International Committee on Fisheries to just hear how they think. And it all is a market-based economy. And I kind of skipped over this in my talk. I meant to bring this up, is that when we won this treaty right to fish, all that was available to us was this real highly privatized, it's quite complicated, long history, but a privatized model of the fishery where, the independent fishers were being consumed by corporations, very much like in the big farming industry. And so, yeah, this I'm just going to try to wrap up briefly here on these two questions. Number one, I'll just share a quick little story. When the big tsunami had hit in 2004, I traveled to Sri Lanka. I just had these beautiful friends in the fisheries movement, and Sri Lanka about 5 or 6 months after. And who did I see out fishing? If anybody's familiar with Sri Lanka, I don't know if we have anybody from Sri Lanka on the phone, was the small scale that they kind of sit on these poles. I don't know how they do that. They were fishing because the tsunami had hit the industrial fishing fleet so bad that it was first the small scales. So I sometimes wonder about this ability to be able to feed the world. This is sort of, to me, it's a... It's to support the market-based economy, and then to go back to ecocide and land grab. And yes, of course, there's directly a link. And I'm going to even just go to the other end of the spectrum about this notion of greenwashing and blue washing that I call it, ocean grabbing and land grabbing, and it's under the whole notion that we're going to do something environmentally friendly with it for you. And even that is another form of dispossession from our lands and waters. It's something, it's another complicated system. But what I just want to speak to is that a lot of this ocean economy, you're going to hear a lot of that in Canada right now. That's just to feed Canada into the economic economy. But the blue economy, that's blue carbon economy, this green economy, these carbon credits and so forth. It's interesting how that's all quantified, and how that all supports a market system. But what infuriates me even more, and this is about climate change, you see me revving up here, is that the reason why we have the greenwashing and blue washing, it's done by those corporations and companies that cause the pollution and that need to begin with. This whole carbon exchange economy, though I don't know all the intricate details of it, to me is to support that market system to people that cause that to begin with. Anyways, there are definite links. They're very they're very complex. I wish I could talk a little bit about this ecocide and so forth. And I'll just end with this, is that I know there's even this, what is it called, this eco-anxiety that, and I'm always careful of that, particularly with the younger generation and so forth. But I thought to myself, in marginalized peoples, been experiencing this eco anxiety. I don't know if that's a proper name, but it's something along that, environmental anxiety or something like that. But we've been experiencing this all of our lives. We've been experiencing this for generations, and we're still experiencing that. Anyways, hit a couple of nerves there, but that Vivian really and Paul really revved me up. So thank you.
I like how this conversation has been building. I don't know if Paul or Vivian wanted me to. Oh my goodness! Sorry, I'm going to read out this message from Adrian. Thanks for the amazing talks. The geographer David Harvey calls neoliberalism. I can't even talk right now. Neoliberalism, a period of accumulation by dispossession, referring to an ongoing process of theft that started in the early capitalist period with settler colonialism and slavery. You each point out that these processes and their afterlives never disappeared, that they are not problems of the distant past. Can you speak to why that the struggles, solidarities, and resistances over food that you each described are necessary to shift the competitive logic of neoliberalism that the world is trapped in? Wonderful, I got there. I'll give you guys a few minutes to reread that one.
Well, I'll just start and just very quickly say, I think we are at a juncture in time where we know the planet is in trouble. We are still depleting resources at a rate that they cannot replenish themselves, and I think it's this is quite a complex question, but that something has to happen. Something like, here we are in a pandemic. Did we ever think that would happen in our lifetime? But I think this climate change and all of these issues, we can't think of it, oh, that's the environment, we're human. We have to start looking at that relationship that we were talking about earlier. And if we don't soon do something, I think we're going to end up in a real critical place. So, I mean, we're already accepting the fact that there's going to be more pandemics to come and so forth. And for me, that's why those solidarities and struggles and so forth over food have to take on a different logic as opposed to competitive logic. And yeah, there's much more to this, but that's just fundamentally off the top of my head what I can what I can think of is that the more that we participate in this competitive neoliberal structure, the more, and this is what Indigenous people are struggling with, the more we are being forced to participate in destroying our land and water bases, which, for quite frankly, of how I was raised, our food and water and lifeways are embedded in those landscapes. You take away the landscape, and Vivian was talking about this, you take away the landscape, you take away the water. What is that alternative? I'll leave it there. It's a complex.
Yeah, and thank you. And I can I speak? It's so hard for me to see anyone. Am I heard? Any signs?
I wonder if I can pin you. Hold on.
I wish I could see people's faces, but I guess it's not an option, huh? Show participants. Oh no, it just shows me a list. But anyway, I just wanted to say, as to what Sherry was saying also, and to this question, And, you know, I use the word neoliberal a lot because that's a framework we can understand the mess we're in. But I want to say that for me, perhaps what I would like to have, you know, invite people to think about is this commitment we have to logic. I mean, we have this commitment to reality also. We were so committed to the mediocrity of what we call reality that a lot of times I think what we're truly lacking is just imagination. Like, just dare. Okay, we don't see the alternative very clearly now, but we really have to, first of all, unshame ourselves about the fact that we are emotional beings, and then also kind of just disconnect from this absolute commitment to reality. Like, I don't understand it. For me, I'm so uninterested in reality, in the sense that it's not that I don't witness and know that injustice exists. Obviously, I live in it. I'm not allowed to travel to see my family. I have a different color ID that identifies me as a Palestinian. I'm not even human to the oppressive state that I live under its military. So it's not that I don't know reality. I know reality. But in order for me to imagine something new, to create something new, I have to dare to imagine something outside of reality. And I think that's what I'm often missing in conversations. We can sit and talk about what's going on all day, and it's important for us to understand what's going on. But then we can't just leave it like that. We have to dare, each one of us, in whatever way, whatever thing we do. Is when I started my work, a lot of people 10 years ago thought that I was in my own community. I was just having this conversation today with someone that, even people in my own family who thought that I was totally insane and completely lost, and maybe I should really see a therapist because, I'm running around after the old ladies and the donkeys and looking for seeds, and, why am I not wearing nice high heels and makeup or whatever. But in my heart and mind, I was committed to imagining something else. Have I changed the world? No, but I did my part. And imagine if all of us, the number of us who do that increases, then we actually will have less people willing to obey a system that tells us we're shit, that tells us that being emotional being is a problem, that tells us that we need to wear makeup and high heels. So I'm just always kind of amazed how many of us are willing to say how lovely it is to imagine a new world, but when push comes to shove, the obedience to the system is so still there. There's a commitment to the system.
That's beautiful. I also think, neoliberalism has really caused us to forget about our obligation to care for each other. It's convinced us that we're against each other. You see people looking over their fence at what their neighbor has and thinking, I deserve more or what have you. But I really feel that we've just lost in lots of ways, or it's really trying to. I don't think it's succeeded, but really trying to convince us that we have no obligation to each other. And the obligation that we do have is really, it's not beautiful. It's not supportive. I mentioned food banks earlier, and I think about middle-class folks who are, wrestling with this idea of poverty and homelessness, and decide that the thing to do is donate to a food bank, as opposed to, really demonstrating solidarity with low-income people and recognizing that people are low income in lots of ways, because of the ways neoliberalism has completely obliterated employment legislation, the social safety net, and that middle-class folks have much more in common with low-income people than our neoliberal masters. So I think, it's really done an incredible job of pitting us against each other and diminishing our ability to really think about how important it is and recognize how important it is and the obligation that we have to care for each other.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, everyone. I'd like to finish off the talk with asking one final question. If you could provide one action that you would encourage the audience to take in supporting food sovereignty movements, what would that be?
I would say, ask and listen to what food sovereignty movements need. Each movement is different. You're all different. Think about your spheres of influence, your capacity, your interest. And if you're interested in engaging with food sovereignty movements, ask the folks involved with them how best you can serve them, and then show up. Be honest about what you can and can't commit to, and then honor those commitments. I think, those are pretty basic things, but are really key to how we show up in solidarity for anyone.
That was so well said, Paul, but I will try to give my piece to add to what Paul said. I would say, actually, especially, for folks kind of pondering this question, I think it's important to know who you are. It's really important to know who you are, meaning like you can know who you are, and from that place, you can offer something also genuine. I don't think it's like, I love Paul's example when, he talked about, when people want to donate to food banks, and what do they donate? The canned food they don't want to eat. And that comes from a lack of authenticity, I think. It's very important that, we bring who we are to the struggle. And if you're committed to creating a new world, a new design, then you have to be rigorous with yourself about who you really are, meaning who you really are with the limitations and the privileges and the abilities. And also, what is it that I genuinely can offer as a form of solidarity that also feeds me, so there isn't that kind of bitterness about like, yeah, well, I did this, and I hate it so much when folks, especially in our case in Palestine, I receive a lot of, well, obviously pre-pandemic, a lot of European guests. Many of them come with this idea that, oh, they're so privileged and they're kind of gonna like feel sorry for us. That's indignant, and it's not actually helpful, and that is not solidarity. True solidarity for me is with folks who come from Europe also, but know who they are, and they tell you, this is what I can do, and they actually do it because they also love it. Like, you bring who you are to the struggle. Don't pretend to be something you're not. And this I appreciate very much when folks come and they really want to be real. I think we are so taken by slogans that we're often like not real with each other, and often not real with ourselves. And I'm saying this because I've also had to refine my own understanding of myself, and it's an ongoing journey. Like, I'm still trying to figure out every time, who am I really? Am I really telling the truth? If I'm giving someone a gift, or is it a gift, or is it you know what I'm saying? So I feel like knowing who we are is such a big power that it's so underestimated.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, because I know we're out of time here. Yeah, I really agree with Vivian and Paul, and I think it's about building relationships. And my experience has been, a lot of people show up and they want, a fast fix for their own guilt. And that's not the way it works. Like I talked about when I spoke about my friend, Martha Stegman. I've been knowing her since my daughter was 4 or 5, and my daughter's now 22, and that's really true commitment. She's a researcher. I call her the researcher that never went away, but really worked with this community to, in a participatory way, to help them find their voice. And the last thing I would say, I'm thinking more and more, and I don't want to talk too high above it, about this word sovereignty and where it came from. And I know it's a political move. I know it's a movement move, a political move in the movement to claim sovereignty. But think about this. I think we need a discussion about what do we mean by sovereignty and what do we mean by solidarity? Are they contradictory terms? No. And that's weird from an Indigenous people because we're persons say that because we're always talking about sovereignty, sovereignty. And to me, sovereignty is claiming power over something, and I can't find a word in the Mi'kmaq language for it. I'm not a fluent speaker, but I ask fluent speakers this all the time. And we need to think about what we need sovereignty. Do we need to qualify sovereignty? What do we really mean when we're talking food sovereignty? And what do we really mean when we talk about solidarity with food movements? I think we need to explore that, and I'll leave it there.
I think those are really fantastic points to leave us on. Sorry, I'll just recap here. We lost Paul. Really sorry to have lost him. Seems that the sound wasn't working, but he wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity, for the invitation, and also to have shared space with Vivian and Sherry. And I'll just read this message out from Adrian, Paul, Vivian, and Sherry. That was very powerful. Thanks for sharing these thoughts about solidarity. This has been an incredible way to conclude our speaker series for this academic year. So I think I'll just say something very, very quickly. I want to say that I'm very honored to have been asked to moderate this talk, and also to hear from our wonderful speakers. You guys bring such a diverse amount of knowledge, and really we're very lucky and fortunate for all the work that you've done. So thank you so much, Gwetch. I will go ahead and transfer the operations to Nicole to wrap us up. But I wanted to thank you all again. I can't thank you enough. It was a fantastic talk.
Yes, definitely. Me too. Thanks, everyone. This is really great. So just before we wrap up, I guess I'd like to thank everyone for joining. And of course, big thank you to Paul, Sherry, and Vivian for your time and insight. And thank you, Danny, for agreeing to lead tonight's discussion. And seeing as this is the last lecture of the What is Solidarity series, a big thank you to everyone who's joined us throughout the past year and made these discussions possible.